We don't let unaccompanied children sit in first class, especially not without supervision, the flight attendant said sharply, her voice slicing through the quiet hum of boarding passengers like a blade. Her tone wasn't just firm, it carried judgment. Wrapped in a false smile, that single sentence stopped everything. Conversations froze mid-sentence. A couple rows away, a businessman paused while placing his briefcase in the overhead bin. An elderly woman in 3B turned slowly, brows raised. The girl in question, seated in 2A by the window, didn't look up right away. She was too focused on the book in her lap. A Brief History of Time, its pages slightly bent from rereading. Her name was Imani Brooks, 13 years old, soft-spoken, calm, and far more intelligent than most adults gave her credit for. She wasn't dressed like someone used to luxury. Gray hoodie, neat jeans, no brand logos, but she carried herself with quiet confidence. Now, before we continue, take a moment to let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Don't forget to like this video if stories about truth, dignity, and justice matter to you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? We've got powerful stories coming every week. Now, back to the story. Imani slowly lifted her eyes to meet the woman's. The flight attendant, Amanda Greer, had been working the airline for over 20 years. Today, she saw a young black girl seated alone in first class, and something inside her, a mixture of unease and subconscious bias, assumed a mistake had been made. Amanda's voice softened, but only a little. "May I see your boarding pass? Sweetie?" Imani nodded politely and handed it over without hesitation. Amanda scanned it. Seat 2A, boarding group 1, no errors, but she still didn't move. "And where are your parents?" she asked. "I'm traveling alone," Imani said. "My mom booked my ticket. She's meeting me in New York." Amanda paused, then frowned slightly, as if trying to reconcile the facts with what her instincts refused to accept. Before Amanda could speak again, a white woman behind Imani leaned in from the aisle, her pearls swinging as she pointed accusingly. "I saw her come up from the back," the woman said. "She doesn't belong up here. I think she slipped past security." Her voice rang out with such confidence that others in the cabin began whispering. The woman's name was Kara Whitmore, a real estate agent from Connecticut, and she had the kind of entitlement that didn't ask. It expected. Amanda glanced down at Imani again, now unsure. "Stay here, please," she said tightly, and turned to whisper something into her colleague's ear. Within minutes, a uniformed crew member returned. "We need you to move to the back of the aircraft while we sort this out," Amanda said. Imani blinked. "But this is my seat." She opened the front cover of her book and pulled out the folded boarding pass. "You already scanned it at the gate. My mom booked first class with her platinum business card." "Honey, we're not saying it's fake," Amanda interrupted. "We just need to confirm with a supervisor. Please don't make this difficult," Kara added smugly. "She should be thankful she's even allowed on this flight." Imani looked around. No one spoke up. Some passengers looked away. One man frowned but didn't say anything. Another woman adjusted her headphones, pretending not to hear. Imani stood up slowly. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. But her face said everything: shock, sadness, and a hint of something deeper. Disbelief. She picked up her small backpack, kept her shoulders straight, and walked the long, narrow aisle back to row 26. No apology, no explanation, just humiliation. Once seated between a window and a quiet older woman, Imani stared down at her hands, then pulled out her phone. She dialed a number. On the third ring, a woman answered, her voice warm and strong. "Hey, baby, did you board already?" Imani took a breath. "They kicked me out of first class. Mom." A pause. "They said I didn't belong there." On the other end, Ava Brooks went silent. Not because she was surprised, but because she was furious. "What seat are you in now?" Ava asked evenly. 26B, next to the engine." Ava stood up from the airport cafe where she'd been reviewing tomorrow's board agenda. She gathered her coat, her tablet, and her purse in one swift motion. "Stay there. Don't move. I'm 10 minutes from your gate." Her voice was firm, controlled, like a storm gathering behind calm water. As she strode through Concourse B of Hartsfield-Jackson Airport in Atlanta, her heels clicked against the tile like a metronome counting down to impact. This wasn't just any mother on her way to confront a flight crew. This was the founder and CEO of Brooks Capital Strategies, one of the most powerful black women in American finance. She'd earned every title, every accolade, every inch of the life she built brick by brick after being told she'd never make it, and someone had just humiliated her daughter in public. On a flight, Ava had personally upgraded for safety, comfort, and dignity. Back on the plane, Amanda returned to the front of first class and informed the gate crew that they had an unverified passenger situation. All while holding Imani's original seat for standby upgrades, Kara sat back smugly, sipping her sparkling water, unaware that a Category 5 reckoning was walking down the jet bridge in stilettos and a navy blue power suit. 10 minutes. That was all Ava needed. And nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same again. The walk from Concourse B's gate lounge to gate B22 wasn't far, but Ava Brooks made it feel like a red carpet lined with silence and reckoning. Her navy blue heels clicked against the polished tile like warning bells, her black leather coat flowing behind her like a cape. Heads turned as she passed, some recognizing her from Forbes or CNN, others simply sensing her presence before realizing why. Her face didn't show rage, only purpose. Her eyes were laser-focused. She had one thing in mind, her daughter. A daughter who had just been publicly humiliated. On a flight Ava herself had upgraded weeks ago, 10 minutes earlier. Ava had been seated calmly at a quiet table near Gate A19, sipping black coffee while reviewing briefing notes for tomorrow's acquisition meeting. Her assistant, Leo, had just sent over updated figures from the Zurich office. Everything was in order. But then that call came. "They kicked me out of first class. Mom, they said I didn't belong there." The words weren't panicked. They weren't hysterical. That's what broke Ava's heart the most. How composed Imani had sounded, as if part of her expected it, as if this wasn't the first time the world questioned where she belonged. Ava's mind raced as she neared the gate. Her daughter was 13, brilliant, grounded, and deeply intuitive. She'd just returned from placing third in the National Youth Engineering Symposium and was flying to New York to accept a Youth Innovation Grant on behalf of her school's STEM program. She wasn't some unaccompanied minor. She was the future, and someone had reduced her to nothing more than a profile, a stereotype, a girl who didn't look the part. As Ava approached Gate B22, the boarding door was still open, with the final call about to be made. "Excuse me," she said calmly to the gate agent. "My daughter was just moved from her first-class seat without cause. I'd like to speak to the in-flight supervisor." The gate agent looked up, confused. "Ma'am, I'd be happy to page someone, but—" Ava handed over her card. "I'm not asking—" The agent scanned it. Her face changed instantly. "Yes, Ms. Brooks. One moment, please." With a nod, Ava stepped past the podium, past the idle glances, and into the jet bridge. The cabin door opened as Amanda, the flight attendant, appeared, smiling reflexively. "Can I help you?" Ava's tone was steady. "Yes, you can. My name is Ava Brooks. I'm the mother of the child you removed from seat 2A. Amanda blinked. Her practiced smile faltered. "Oh. We were just trying to confirm her seat. You already did, at the gate. when her pass was scanned, then again when she showed it to you. So I ask again, why was she removed? Amanda glanced behind her as if searching for support. We just had a report from another passenger. There was some confusion. What kind of confusion? Ava asked. Did she threaten someone? Violate protocol? Or did someone simply decide that a black child didn't look like she belonged in first class? Amanda's throat tightened. She took a half step back. Ma'am, I think we should step aside and speak in private. Ava lowered her voice but leaned in closer. This won't be private. Not anymore. You embarrassed my daughter publicly. So we're going to address this publicly. Amanda was now visibly uncomfortable, shifting her stance, glancing toward the other passengers. Kara Whitmore, seated in 2C, removed her earbuds and narrowed her eyes at Ava. Is there a problem? She asked. Ava turned slowly. Yes, there is. Are you the passenger who falsely claimed my daughter didn't belong here? Kara smirked. She looked out of place. I thought she was sneaking in from coach. You mean she looked black? Ava said evenly. And young, and unaccompanied. And that was enough for you to sound the alarm. Kara crossed her arms. Don't twist this into a racial thing. Ava blinked slowly. I'm not twisting anything. I'm unfolding it. In plain view. Passengers were now paying full attention. Even the pilot, Captain Douglas, had stepped out of the cockpit to observe. Amanda, realizing this was spiraling fast, reached for the intercom. Let's sit you down in first class again, she offered to Ava, trying to diffuse. We can bring your daughter back, and we'll... Ava shook her head. She doesn't want pity, she wants dignity, and an apology. Amanda's face paled. Of course, I'll prepare a report. There are procedures. Ava cut her off gently but firmly. I'm familiar with procedures. I've helped rewrite a few myself. She turned back to the gate. Bring my daughter back, now. Within minutes, a flight attendant escorted Imani back toward the front of the plane. She walked with her backpack held close to her chest, eyes focused ahead. When she saw her mother standing near the bulkhead, she stopped. Ava gave her a small nod. That was enough. Imani stepped into the first-class cabin, looked at Amanda, then at Kara, and said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence was its own statement. She returned to seat 2A, pulled out her book again, and calmly opened to the page she had been reading before all this happened. Ava took the empty seat beside her. No words were exchanged, but between them passed something stronger than speech: solidarity, trust, and unshakable love. Captain Douglas approached quietly. Ms. Brooks, is everything settled? Ava looked up. Not yet, but it will be. Then she reached into her purse, pulled out a small leather notebook, and began writing down names, not out of anger, but accountability. Because when people cross lines, someone has to draw the boundary again, clearly, and this time, it would be heard. Ava didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She sat beside her daughter in seat 2B with the same calm strength she used to command boardrooms, speak before congressional subcommittees, and settle billion-dollar negotiations. But her silence was heavy, undeniable, like the eye of a storm. The passengers around them sensed it. Amanda, the lead flight attendant, hovered by the galley, clearly unsure whether to apologize, retreat, or find a supervisor. The damage was already done, but Ava wasn't interested in theatrics. She was here for truth, and truth required clarity. Ms. Greer, Ava said at last, her voice steady, I'd like to speak with your in-flight supervisor, now. Amanda blinked. I'm the lead on this flight. Ma'am. Then I suggest you take full responsibility. Ava said, because we're going to document every detail of what happened today. Not to punish, to correct. Amanda swallowed hard and stepped forward slowly, hands clasped tightly in front of her. I understand this has been upsetting, but I truly believed your daughter may have been misplaced. We've had issues before. Don't insult either of us by hiding behind policy, Ava said, her tone colder now. This wasn't a safety concern. It was a snap judgment based on race, age, and appearance, and it's not the first time this has happened. Maybe not even for you. Amanda's lips parted as if to respond, but nothing came. Kara Whitmore, still in seat 2C, sighed loudly and rolled her eyes. Honestly, you people turn everything into a crusade, she muttered under her breath, forgetting, or perhaps not caring, that her voice carried more than she thought. Ava turned her head slowly toward her. Would you like to repeat that? Kara looked away. I said nothing. No, Ava said. You said everything. The surrounding passengers sat frozen. A white man in seat 3A looked embarrassed. A black couple in row 4 leaned forward, clearly invested. A flight attendant at the rear, young and Latina, exchanged a glance with the older Asian American man in 2D, both sensing this wasn't just a conflict, but a moment they'd remember. Ava turned back to Amanda. Did Kara's complaint prompt you to question my daughter's legitimacy as a passenger? Amanda hesitated. It contributed. Yes. So you acted not on fact, Ava said, but on the discomfort of a woman who saw a young black girl sitting somewhere she didn't believe she belonged. Amanda's voice cracked. It wasn't about color, but it was. Ava interrupted gently. That's the part no one wants to say out loud, because when you say it, you're accountable. And that's scary, isn't it? Amanda's hands trembled. Her mouth opened and closed twice, before she finally said, I didn't mean to cause harm. Ava nodded. But you did. So now the question is, what are you going to do with that? Amanda backed away, visibly shaken. Kara, meanwhile, pulled a silk sleep mask from her bag with a dramatic sigh. This is ridiculous, she muttered, loud enough for others to hear. You know what's ridiculous? Ava said calmly, never turning her head. That my daughter, who just received a national award in engineering innovation, is sitting here having to justify her existence in a seat we paid for because a woman who's never met her decided she didn't belong. That's not just ridiculous. That's broken. Kara turned to protest, but the pilot, Captain Douglas, stepped forward from the cockpit. He was tall, with silver hair and a calm, authoritative presence. Ladies, he said gently, may I interrupt? Everyone looked toward him. Ms. Brooks, he said, nodding respectfully. We've just been informed that you've filed a formal complaint through the mobile portal. Ava nodded. Correct. I've included the boarding records, seating assignments, and timestamps, along with audio I recorded from the moment my daughter was confronted. The captain's brow lifted slightly, impressed by her thoroughness. Understood. I've notified the airline's incident team. They'll be reviewing the situation immediately. He paused, then turned to Amanda. Ms. Greer, per standard protocol, I'm going to ask you to step out of duty for the remainder of the flight. The cabin crew will reassign responsibilities. Amanda's face crumpled. Captain, please. It's not a termination, he said gently. It's a precaution, while the matter is investigated. Then he turned to Kara. And Ms. Whitmore, I've arranged for you to be rebooked on the next available flight. Your behavior on board has disrupted the cabin and violated our conduct policy. Kara gasped. You can't do that. I'm a platinum member. So is Ms. Brooks, the captain said. But she didn't start this. You did. Kara stood up in disbelief, gathering her things furiously. No one offered to help her. She glanced around the cabin for support, but found only silence. Even the man behind her, who had nodded in agreement earlier, now looked down at his newspaper. She exited without another word. Amanda walked toward the back, still stunned, escorted by another crew member. The cabin was quiet for a long moment. Then the young flight attendant from earlier, a woman with a soft voice and badge reading Isabella, approached Ava and Imani. "Can I get you anything?" she asked gently. "Water? Something to eat?" Imani smiled faintly. "I'm okay. Thank you." Ava looked at her daughter, her expression softening. "You handled that with more grace than most adults would," she said quietly. "I'm proud of you." Imani shrugged, her voice small but steady. "It's not the first time something like this has happened. Mom." Ava closed her eyes briefly. That was the part that hurt most. "Then it's going to be the last time they get away with it," she said, reaching over to gently squeeze her daughter's hand. The plane began to taxi down the runway. First class was quieter now, the air charged not with tension, but with awareness. A line had been drawn, and somewhere, miles above the clouds they were about to climb through, something had just shifted in the atmosphere. Not a headline, not a protest, just a mother, a daughter, and the courage to say, "Enough." Amanda Greer sat in the back galley of the aircraft, her uniform blazer folded over her lap, hands clenched tightly beneath it. The hum of the engine outside the fuselage was a dull, constant vibration. But inside her mind, the noise was louder: regret, confusion, shame, and fear. Not fear of losing her job, but fear that everything she believed about herself might not be true. She had always considered herself fair, firm. Yes, rule-oriented, cautious, but fair. She treated passengers equally. That was the story she'd told herself for years. But today, that story cracked, and the truth was seeping in. Amanda had been with the airline for over 2 decades. She'd trained hundreds of junior crew members, managed dozens of emergency situations, and was known by her colleagues as someone who always followed procedure to the letter. But somewhere between policy and perception, something else had crept in, something she couldn't fully admit, not even to herself. As she sat there, eyes burning and posture stiff, fragments of her own life surfaced uninvited. She remembered being 24, just out of training, walking to her car in the parking lot of a small airport in Ohio. She remembered the fear that night, when 2 teenagers in hoodies had approached her, one of them yelling something she couldn't understand, and how she'd run before anything happened. Nothing did happen, but the fear remained, and both teens had been black. She never spoke about it, but afterward, without realizing, she began holding her purse a little tighter around certain passengers, double-checking ID more often with young men who fit the profile, not maliciously, just instinctively. And that instinct followed her onto every flight, over time. It became second nature. She never saw it as racism. She saw it as caution, self-protection. But now, thinking back to Imani Brooks, sitting alone in seat 2A, politely reading a science book and offering her boarding pass without hesitation, Amanda knew, deep down, she knew, there had been no threat, no rule violated, just discomfort, her discomfort, and Kara Whitmore's voice, entitled, assured, echoing her own private doubts, had simply lit the match. Amanda felt hollow inside, the kind of hollow that comes when the mirror doesn't flatter you anymore. Not the physical kind, but the moral kind. She had spent years earning the right to wear that uniform, to lead a crew, to serve with dignity. And now, one mistake had shattered her sense of integrity. Not because she had been caught, but because someone had finally told the truth to her face. And that someone wasn't angry. She was calm, unshakable. Ava Brooks hadn't screamed. She hadn't threatened. She'd looked at Amanda like a surgeon, precise, unemotional, and deeply aware of what needed to be removed. Amanda exhaled slowly and looked down at her folded blazer. A piece of her name badge peeked out from under the lapel. Lead flight attendant, Amanda Greer. The word lead mocked her now. She hadn't led anything today. She'd followed fear, up front, in first class. Ava sat beside Imani, who had fallen into a light sleep against the window, her book still open across her lap. The quiet hum of flight settled over them like a thin blanket. The cabin lights were dimmed, and the sky beyond the windows had turned golden, a soft glow bleeding over the curve of the clouds. Ava didn't look at her phone. She didn't check email. She simply watched her daughter breathe, for all the strength she had shown earlier. This was the moment that broke something inside her, because even now, knowing her child was safe, seated, and vindicated, she couldn't shake the weight of what had happened. It wasn't just the insult, it was the frequency, the repetition, the exhausting predictability of it all. Imani had only told her part of the truth. Ava now remembered that this wasn't the first time she'd seen her daughter's eyes go quiet after a public encounter. There had been moments, at school, at restaurants, even in stores, when Ava had walked in just as someone questioned her daughter's presence, her purpose, her right to be where she stood, and Imani, always calm, had absorbed it like a sponge, never complaining, never asking why, just adjusting, like a young tree growing sideways to avoid a shadow. Ava's chest ached. She turned to the window, her reflection faint in the glass. She thought of her own childhood, how her father, a janitor in Detroit, used to walk her to the bus stop every morning in a suit and tie, not because he had a meeting, but because he wanted her to see him as important. He never said the words, but Ava understood his message clearly. They may not give you the seat, but you'll carry the posture anyway. And now, here she was, successful beyond what her parents could have imagined, and her daughter was still being made to prove she belonged. Ava clenched her jaw. It wasn't going to end like this. Not today. Not in silence. Not without meaning. In the rear of the plane. Amanda stood up slowly. Her legs felt like sandbags. She looked down the narrow aisle, past the glances of a few passengers who clearly recognized her from earlier, and made her way toward first class. With every step, her heart thudded louder. She didn't know what she would say. She only knew she had to say something. When she reached row 2, Ava looked up. Their eyes met again. Amanda paused. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, but sincere. "Ms. Brooks, I want to apologize." Ava studied her for a long moment. No cruelty, no smugness, just truth. Amanda continued, her hands folded tightly in front of her. "I misjudged your daughter. I assumed things I shouldn't have. I let someone else's opinion guide my actions. And I am truly sorry for the harm that caused." Ava nodded slowly. "Thank you for saying that." Amanda took a breath. "If there's any way I can make it right." Ava spoke gently. "Start by asking yourself why it happened. And don't stop asking until you find an answer you can live with." Amanda's eyes welled. She nodded, then quietly turned and walked away. Ava turned back to Imani, who stirred slightly in her sleep. She reached over and gently brushed a curl from her daughter's forehead. The sky outside burned brighter now, soft orange streaks stretching across a calm blue horizon, somewhere above the clouds. Healing had begun, as Flight 728 cruised smoothly at 34,000 feet. Ava Brooks opened her leather-bound notebook and began writing, each letter deliberate, steady, and clear. She wasn't scribbling in anger. She was documenting, precisely, names, times, seat numbers, exact phrasing. It was a habit she'd learned in her early days as a civil rights attorney. Right as if someone's future depends on it. Because sometimes it does. And today, it wasn't just about Imani. It was about every young person who had ever been told, directly or indirectly, that they were too brown, too young, too unfamiliar to belong in the spaces they'd rightfully earned. Ava glanced sideways at her daughter, who had finally dozed off again, her head resting gently against the window, a folded jacket cushioning her temple. The book in her lap had closed, but one finger remained between the pages, as if ready to resume the moment she woke. Ava gently closed her own notebook and reached for her phone. Connecting to the in-flight Wi-Fi, she drafted an email, not a complaint, but a formal statement addressed to 3 specific recipients: the airline's Director of Customer Experience, the VP of Diversity and Inclusion, and the General Counsel. Her subject line was direct: Incident Report, Unlawful Discrimination and Passenger Mishandling, Flight 728, Gate B22, ATL to JFK. She attached a time-stamped audio recording of Amanda's initial confrontation with Imani, taken from the moment Ava had stepped into the cabin. She included her daughter's boarding pass confirmation, as well as screenshots of her platinum booking and VIP authorization record. It wasn't enough to tell the story. She had to prove it. Because that's how you protect a child in a world that often asks them to carry receipts for their existence. As she typed, a soft voice interrupted her concentration. "Excuse me, Ms. Brooks?" Ava looked up to see the younger flight attendant, Isabella, standing beside her row. The woman held a small white envelope in her hands. "The captain asked me to give this to you," she said gently. "He also asked if you'd be willing to speak with our operations director once we land. He's arranging for a rep to meet you at the gate." Ava nodded. "Thank you. And thank him for the professionalism." Isabella offered a quiet smile, then leaned in slightly. "If I may say, your daughter handled herself with incredible strength, and so did you. A lot of us. We saw it." Ava met her eyes. It was a short exchange, but something passed between them. Acknowledgement, solidarity, and a shared understanding that not all battles are loud. Some are fought silently, in full view of others who've learned to stay quiet too long. Ava turned her attention to the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note from Captain Douglas. "Ms. Brooks, on behalf of myself and the crew, I want to extend my sincerest apologies. I witnessed today not only a breakdown in procedure, but in humanity. I will support any review and reform effort you pursue. Your leadership, in silence and in voice, is an example to all of us. Respectfully, Capt. Michael Douglas." Ava exhaled, touched not by flattery, but by clarity. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about transformation, and she had just gained an unlikely ally in the cockpit. 20 minutes later, as the flight began its descent into New York airspace, Ava reviewed her message one final time and hit send. As the plane banked gently over the Hudson River, city lights glimmering below like scattered diamonds, Imani stirred awake. "Are we almost there?" she asked sleepily. "Almost," Ava said softly, brushing a hand over her daughter's shoulder. "You did well today." Imani looked down. "It didn't feel like it." Ava gently took her hand. "Courage doesn't always feel like power. Sometimes it feels like sitting still when you want to run, or speaking softly when you want to scream. But you were brave. That's bigger than power." Imani's eyes welled, but she blinked the tears back. "I just wanted to sit in the seat we paid for." Ava nodded. "And you will. Again. And again. Until no one questions it." The wheels touched down moments later. A soft thud, then a gentle rumble as the brakes engaged and the aircraft slowed. As the cabin lights returned and passengers stirred, gathering their belongings, Ava remained seated. So did Imani, and so did nearly every passenger in first class, silently aware that something more than travel had occurred in that cabin. Some passengers nodded toward Ava with quiet respect. Others avoided her eyes, not out of guilt, but discomfort. The kind that comes when you begin to question what you've ignored. At the gate, two airline representatives were waiting. One introduced himself as Malcolm Reyes, Director of Corporate Integrity. The other, a black woman in a tailored gray suit, was introduced simply as Monique from Customer Advocacy. Ava stood tall, her daughter beside her. She shook their hands, calm and composed. "I trust you've been briefed," Ava said. Malcolm nodded. "Yes, ma'am. We'll be conducting a full internal review, and we'd like your help in shaping the outcome. Not just for this flight, but for our company moving forward." Ava's gaze held steady. "Then let's not waste time." Behind them, the terminal bustled as it always did. Announcements crackled over the PA system. People rolled suitcases toward connections, and airport screens glowed with arrival times. But in the center of it all, a mother and daughter walked toward baggage claim, unrushed, unbothered, unafraid. Ava didn't say it out loud, but she knew the truth in her bones. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. By the time the sun rose the next morning, the story had already spread far beyond Gate B-22. A passenger seated in row 3, an educator from Georgia, had quietly recorded the exchange between Ava and Amanda during the confrontation on board. Without commentary or editing, she'd uploaded it to her social media with a caption that simply read, "This is what grace under fire looks like. Watch what happens when a black child is treated like a threat, and her mother walks in with calm, power, and receipts." Within 3 hours, the video had crossed 1 million views. By noon, it was on every major platform: TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, hashtags like She Belongs, Seat 2A, and the Imani Standard began trending across the country. News anchors picked it up next, first local, then national, each clip playing the same powerful sequence: a calm, well-dressed black woman walking down the aisle of a plane, locking eyes with a white flight attendant, and saying, "You remove my daughter from a seat she rightfully paid for. I'm here to ask why." There was no shouting, no chaos, just a quiet storm that refused to be ignored. Public reaction poured in from every direction: support from civil rights organizations, airline reform advocates, and thousands of parents who had seen their children face similar indignities. Ava didn't respond immediately. She didn't need to. She was already moving. That same day, she received a personal call from the airline's CEO, who expressed both embarrassment and urgency. "We're launching an internal review," he said. "We'd like your help shaping the outcome." Ava agreed, but only under one condition: that this wouldn't become a one-time apology tour. She wanted systemic change. Within 48 hours, Ava's legal team, led by her firm's Civil Justice Division, submitted a policy proposal titled the Imani Standard. It outlined a new national protocol for unconscious bias training, frontline customer service response, and escalation transparency across commercial flights. The document included real scenarios, audit strategies, and accountability tracking that went far beyond the usual surface-level PR responses. The airline, under intense public scrutiny and with stockholders watching closely, had no choice but to embrace it. But Ava didn't stop there. She reached out to 3 other major U.S. carriers, inviting them to the table, one by one. They joined. Then came hotel chains, rideshare companies, and even a cruise line, all curious, some reluctant. But the pressure was rising, and Ava, with Imani always nearby, became the face of calm disruption. Imani, though only 13, found herself at the center of a cultural moment she hadn't asked for, but one she refused to shrink from. when invited to speak at a youth leadership summit just 2 weeks later. She took the stage in a navy dress, her curly hair pulled back in a crown braid, her voice steady through the microphone. "I didn't expect to change anything," she told a silent crowd of over 400. "I just wanted to sit in the seat we paid for. But I learned something. That sometimes, when someone tells you you don't belong, the best thing you can do is stay seated." The room erupted, not because it was fiery, but because it was true. Ava stood backstage with tears in her eyes, her hands folded tightly, her heart full. It wasn't just a moment, it was a message, and America was listening. Over the following month, the Imani Standard became the most widely adopted anti-bias customer experience reform in U.S. airline history. Airline staff across all 50 states were required to complete immersive cultural empathy training. A new digital protocol for reporting passenger profiling went live. Flight crews began reviewing real stories, not just corporate slideshows. And in airports from Boston to Oakland, signs quietly appeared near security checkpoints and boarding gates. Each one read, "All seats are earned. All passengers deserve dignity. Let this be a place where bias does not fly." Ava never asked for her name to be on them, but in smaller print, just beneath the message, read the words, "Inspired by Imani Brooks, Passenger 2A. Still, not everyone was pleased. Critics claimed Ava had weaponized influence, that she had used her status to make an example out of an everyday mistake. Ava responded in an op-ed in The Atlantic titled, "Grace is not a privilege." She wrote, "This was never about fame. This was never about going viral. It was about my daughter. It was about every daughter, every child who's been told to move, to wait, to be quiet. I am not interested in punishing flight attendants. I am interested in retraining the culture that trained them." The article struck a chord. Letters poured in from teachers, nurses, business owners, grandparents, some black, some white, all sharing stories of moments when their children or grandchildren were made to feel smaller. Many said the same thing. "We didn't have a name for it, until now." Back at home, life for Ava and Imani remained grounded. Ava still made breakfast every morning, steel-cut oats and sliced fruit. Imani still walked their dog, Milo, and complained about her algebra teacher. But something had shifted. Not in how they moved, but in how the world moved around them. One afternoon, while walking through LaGuardia en route to another conference, a TSA agent paused Ava and whispered, "Your daughter's story helped my niece. She stood up to a teacher last week who questioned her reading level," she said. "If Imani Brooks can speak up, so can I." Ava smiled gently. "Tell her to keep speaking, and keep sitting, too." At that moment, Ava realized something. Justice isn't always a courtroom or a protest. Sometimes it's a girl on a plane, reading a book, refusing to shrink. Sometimes it's a mother in heels, asking the right question. And sometimes it's a ripple, small at first, until it becomes a wave. A year had passed since Flight 728, but for Imani Brooks, the moment still lingered, not as a scar, but as a compass. At just 14, her life looked different now. Not louder, not brighter, just clearer. She had grown into herself. Not because of what happened that day, but because of how she chose to carry it. She didn't become an activist. She didn't need to. She became something quieter, something deeper, a symbol of stillness in the face of judgment, a reminder that power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just stays seated. That morning, as she stood at Gate 12 at Washington Dulles Airport, wearing a soft gray blazer and dark jeans, Imani watched the final boarding group file into the jet bridge. The gate agent smiled and waved her forward. "Miss Brooks, you're welcome to pre-board with Group 1, she said, her tone warm and respectful. Imani nodded politely, her heart calm. This time, no one questioned her place. No one asked for extra ID. No one tilted their head or said "sweetheart" with condescension. She stepped onto the aircraft with the quiet confidence of someone who no longer feared small humiliations. As she walked down the aisle of the Boeing 757, passengers already seated glanced up, but not with suspicion, with recognition. One or two even offered her soft nods of support, like strangers tipping their hats to someone who had survived a storm they couldn't see. Imani reached row 2 and slid into seat 2A, the window seat, the very seat she had once been removed from. She set her carry-on under the seat in front of her, pulled out a worn copy of Hidden Figures, and placed it in her lap. A flight attendant, black, maybe mid-30s, stopped beside her with a smile. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I just wanted to say, my daughter keeps your photo taped to her bedroom wall. She says you remind her that calm is a kind of superpower." Imani's cheeks flushed, but she smiled softly. "Thank you," she whispered. "Tell her to keep reading. That's where it all starts." The woman nodded and moved on. The plane filled slowly. A middle-aged man in a gray sweater took the aisle seat beside her, offered a polite smile, then returned to his crossword puzzle. Imani gazed out the window, her reflection faint in the glass. The tarmac below bustled with movement. Luggage carts, fuel trucks, orange-vested workers waving signals. Everything had a rhythm. Everything had a place, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had hers. As the aircraft began its slow pushback from the gate, Imani pulled out a folded envelope from her inside pocket. Her mother had slipped it into her bag earlier that morning, saying only, "Open it when you're ready." Imani unfolded the note and read the handwritten message. "To my daughter, you are not just the future. You are the correction." The red line through a history written in pencil. "Don't shrink for comfort. Don't stand for permission. Sit in every seat like it's yours. Because it is. With love and pride. Always. Mom." Imani folded the note slowly, then closed her eyes. For a moment. She was back in that plane a year ago. Heart pounding, hands clutching her backpack as she walked past rows of strangers. But this time, the memory didn't sting. It steadied her. It shaped her spine. At cruising altitude. She pulled out her laptop and opened a draft essay for a national scholarship competition. The prompt was simple. Describe a moment that changed the way you see the world. She typed. It wasn't the words that hurt. It was the quiet agreement. The way everyone watched and no one spoke. The way I was made to feel invisible in full view. But then my mother came. And with 10 minutes of clarity, she rewrote what dignity looks like at 3,000 feet. That's the day I learned silence can be grace, and grace can be force. I stayed seated, and in doing so, I stood for something. As the plane descended toward Boston, the city skyline peeking through clouds, Imani closed her laptop and took a breath. She wasn't nervous. She was prepared. The next day, she would address a youth panel at MIT on the future of engineering ethics, not because of what she'd endured, but because of how she'd responded. She was becoming a builder, not just of machines or code, but of bridges between perception and truth, between power and presence. When the plane touched down and rolled toward the gate, the captain made an announcement over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've just landed in Boston, where the local time is 6:14 p.m. Before we begin our arrival instructions, I'd like to recognize a very special passenger on board today, Miss Imani Brooks. On behalf of this crew and thousands of others, you remind us that dignity is not granted. It is claimed, and you claimed it with courage. Welcome to Boston, Miss Brooks." A soft round of applause broke out in the cabin. Nothing loud, nothing staged, just genuine. Warm respect from strangers who understood that quiet justice had flown with them. Imani blinked back tears, smiling at the window, not for the recognition, but for what it meant. Somewhere out there, a girl was watching this unfold on a screen. Somewhere, a boy was wondering if he'd be believed when the world doubted him. And now they had an answer. Because dignity is contagious, and courage, when witnessed, doesn't disappear, it multiplies. As Imani stepped off the plane, backpack slung over one shoulder, she carried no bitterness, only memory, only purpose. The story of Flight 728 no longer belonged just to her. It belonged to every person who had ever sat quietly in a space where they weren't expected, who had been asked to move, and instead stayed seated. That story had taken flight, and now it would never land. Thanks for watching. If this story meant something to you, give it a like and subscribe. Take care. See you in the next one.